Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Hopefully everybody is doing well out there today. We got to talk about some tight ends. We're crossing in to the double digits now, week 10 of the NFL season. We're past the halfway point now, and we are rolling towards the playoffs. Hopefully everyone's teams are playing well. Seeing a lot of comments right now from people who are like, I just had to stick it out. I'm getting there. We're going to get to the playoffs. And it's great to hear that. It was a crazy start to the season. Some guys didn't perform up to expectations. They're starting to catch up, though. And hopefully you had some of those guys that are playing very, very well right now. But I've got a lot of tight ends to talk about. And I actually have got way more starts this week at the tight end position than I feel like I've ever had before for a few different reasons. Some decent games. Guys have been playing well. But the problem is that a lot of them are risky, and we're going to have to try and figure out which ones have the least amount of risk associated with them and kind of jump into that thought process and figure out what one is the best one to start. But let's kick it off for Thursday Night Football, and let's talk Atlanta and Carolina. Again, like I said, there's going to be a lot of guys listed as starts, and Pitts really has one decent game that has inflated his numbers to get him towards 15. I've even got the X factor at 1, and the matchup is a 2, and he still hits 15. So based on what the numbers say, he would be a start. But honestly, for me, the only way I'm starting Kyle Pitts is if you don't have anybody that has even a remotely higher ceiling than what Kyle Pitts does. Really, the only thing we're banking on is a touchdown. If he gets a touchdown, he's a start. If he doesn't, you're probably going to have another week of extremely bad numbers, and he's really close to being droppable at this point anyway. For the Carolina Panthers, Ian Thomas, Tommy Tremble, tight end sighting last week. Don't get too excited, though. Tommy Tremble did find the end zone for Carolina last week, but that's just a blip on the radar. There hasn't really been anything else to be excited about so far this season. Seattle and Tampa Bay going to be across the pond for the first time ever in Germany. Tampa Bay is allowing the 10th most fantasy points to tight ends right now, and this is really a good matchup for Noah Fant. I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be like, Kyle, do we think Noah Fant is a good option, especially coming off the game that we saw last week? Here's the issue for me, though. It is a good matchup, but he only has 2 games this season with 6 or more targets. And last week is his only game on the season where he has more than 50 receiving yards. So when you have a guy like Noah Fant that's coming off a good game, but you still have Will Dissly, you still have Kobe Parkinson, both of those guys are getting looks, snaps, targets, all the above. When you have things like that happening, it's really hard for me to say, yeah, this is a great matchup. Let's go ahead and run Fant out there. It's just too risky for me. I mean, he's at a 14. He's basically on the same plane as Kyle Pitts right now. He just has one less point. So for me, I'm skipping out on Noah Fant this week. But hey, Cade Otton's going to be a start for me. He is going to be. Seattle allows the most fantasy points to tight ends, coming off a week in which they allowed a touchdown to Zach Ertz. And, I mean, it's a great matchup for him. Brady's starting to gain the trust of him right now. It seems like the rest of the wide receivers just keep messing up. Mike Evans is dropping passes. Everybody else is dropping passes. Ott was the go-to guy with the game on the line last week. They go to him. I think that's starting to help him gain a little bit more momentum with Tom Brady, and we're going to see him put up some better games here coming soon. Minnesota and Buffalo, this is going to be a big game, not just for fantasy, but for the standings, for playoff implications, for lots of different things, and Minnesota is going to have to go to Buffalo for it. Is Buffalo going to be able to bounce back? How is Josh Allen's elbow feeling? There's a lot of question marks in this game, but one question mark was answered last week, and that was TJ Hockenson and how he's going to fit into this Minnesota scheme. Buffalo allows the 8th fewest fantasy points to tight end, so we already know it's going to be a tough matchup. But TJ Hockenson had a pretty tough matchup based on the numbers last week as well, and he still saw 9 targets and caught all 9 of them. He was implemented into the game plan immediately, and I hope that they keep doing this. And not only that, but this is a game where Kirk Cousins is probably going to have to sling the rock a few extra times going up against that Buffalo offense. So for TJ Hockenson, even in a tough matchup, seeing how he was utilized last week, we are going to go with him this week as a start. Dawson Knox is also going to be a start this week. And the reason I'm putting him up to a start is because of that elbow injury to Josh Allen. Now, I don't know still at this point how significant it is. As of this recording, not a whole lot of information on potential missed time or anything like that. So because of that, we're just going to operate under the impression that he's dealing with probably some soreness. Okay, maybe a strain of some kind, no tears or anything like that, hopefully. And if that's the case, maybe we're not going as deep as much. Maybe we need to check down a few more times. And that's where Dawson Knox could become extremely viable for the team. And not only that, but it is a pretty decent matchup based on the numbers. So even though I've been critical of Dawson Knox over the last couple of weeks, we are going to go to him this week because I think this could be the perfect setup for him. Detroit coming off an impressive win over the Green Bay Packers, and now they'll get another division rival in the Chicago Bears. Detroit's tight ends, though, at this point, it's kind of all over the place. They've got 3 guys now with the trade of TJ Hockenson that they're going to be rotating in and out. So all of them are going to be sits for me. Yeah, 2 of them found the end zone last week, but even if you would have played them, they only would have gotten you 6 points based on the rest of the numbers that they had. So Chicago's allowing the 4th fewest fantasy points to tight ends. So that number 1 right there says, hey, maybe we shouldn't roll with them. Yes, a lot of changes over the middle of the Chicago Bears defense. Last week, you could see Minnesota really picking that apart, Miami really picking that apart. But this week, is Detroit going to be able to do that with their tight ends? Probably not. It would be Amon-Ra St. Brown that they would do it with instead. So all these guys, not really a whole lot of value here. We're going to skip on all 3 of them. Cole Kmet, though, is finally going to make his way to being a start this season. Why? Number 1, Detroit allows the 3rd most fantasy points per game to tight ends. He's got 3 touchdowns over the last 2 games, and he's starting to look like the go-to option for Justin Fields, which is what we were hoping for last week. Now, Detroit's cornerbacks last week, they did a pretty decent job. They gave up a couple of big plays, but if you watch the game, Detroit's defense definitely took a little bit of a step forward, which is good to see. So maybe they won't be as nearly as a pushover the rest of the season like they were to begin the season. But I'm still thinking more than enough volume this week for Cole Kmet. He's my prize picks prop to play this week. Kmet over 25.5 receiving yards. I'm going to take that and smash the over on it. One other thing about Detroit, too, that might end up influencing Cole Kmet. Hadn't heard for sure what the issue was. Malcolm Rodriguez seemed to bang up his arm a little bit. May have been the elbow or the shoulder. If that limits him in any way or if he misses time, that could also be good for Cole Kmet because Rodriguez, very athletic in the middle of the field. Jacksonville and Kansas City is going to bring my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. If you're looking for any type of Christmas presents, stocking stuffers, just a gift for your significant other, head over to manscaped.com. Fill up that basket full of goodies, and when you check out, use code word headliners. You're going to get 20% off the entire order and free shipping. So for the Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week, it's going to be Jacksonville and Kansas City, and a couple of really good tight ends, one of which hasn't been good for a while. Now, all of a sudden, it's kind of popped up out of nowhere, and of course, Travis Kelce. But Kansas City does allow the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. And Ingram had a down performance last week, and it's probably going to sour some people, but we're going right back to him, all right? Since week 5, he's 3rd in targets, 7th in receptions, 4th in yards, and the tight end 9 since week 5. So he's obviously been providing more than enough fantasy value. We're going to go back to him in a good matchup for him. And then Travis Kelce, absolutely insane season for him right now. He has 36.9 more fantasy points in half PPR leagues than the tight end 2, Mark Andrews. You want to hear something crazier? He has 50 more points than the tight end 3, Zach Ertz. That's absolutely insane. Normally, I'm a guy that says, hey, like 2nd round, I'm skipping on Travis Kelce. I'm going to risk it with maybe a couple of other guys later on. If there was ever a year to draft Travis Kelce, either late 1st or early 2nd, it was 100% this year. Cleveland and Miami might be bringing back one of the steadiest tight ends to begin the season in David Njoku. He was hitting his stride, looking really good. Then, unfortunately, the ankle injury popped up. Now, with David Njoku, he is practicing right now, but it is a limited fashion. But I'm going to list him as a start, going up against a Miami defense that allows the 4th most fantasy points to tight end. So if David Njoku plays, he is a start for me. Cole Kmet touchdown last week, and they've allowed the 3rd most receptions to touchdowns. The Miami defense, speaking of them. For Mike Gesicki, though, the Browns allow the 6th fewest fantasy points to tight end, and Mike Gesicki, outside of one huge performance this year, hasn't been fantasy viable at all. Houston and New York is going to bring up a matchup where we're actually sitting a couple of tight ends. Like I said, lots of starts this week, a lot of risky guys, but a lot of potential among the tight end position this week. Jordan Akins is getting out there. Brevin Jordan's getting out there. OJ Howard's getting out there. I could have added those two guys to the slide, but I said, you know what? What's the point in doing the extra work when none of them are going to be starts anyway? There's no consistency among the group. And for Chris Myarick, I mean, 2 weeks ago after the loss of Bellinger, he only saw one target. So it's really hard for me to even trust him as well. So for me, the Houston-New York Giants matchup at the tight end position is a wash. New Orleans and Pittsburgh, and hopefully you all are starting to see why all season long I've tried to tell you that Taysom Hill is not as a good of a start as you all think. Now, there's like 50% of you out there in our community that are like, Kyle, absolutely agree. Taysom Hill, I can't stand him. But there's like another 50% of you that are like, no, Taysom Hill is this fantasy football god tier weapon that we need to be using no matter what. That's not the case. I'm staying away from Hill this week. Pittsburgh allows the 7th fewest fantasy points to tight ends. All right. And I know he doesn't line up as a traditional tight end, so maybe that doesn't really affect him that much. But listen to these numbers. He's got 1 touchdown in the last 4 weeks. And outside of 61 rushing yards 2 weeks ago, he hasn't eclipsed 60 total yards in a game since week 5. A majority of Taysom Hill's games over the last 5 weeks have been just awful games, awful performances. 1 week he scored a touchdown, so he got you like 7 fantasy points. The other week he had the 61 rushing yards, so he got you like 6 fantasy points. But other than that, there has been no upside. Now that I've gone on this giant tirade, he's probably going to score 3 touchdowns this week. But for Pittsburgh, Pat Freiermuth, New Orleans allows the 2nd fewest fantasy points to tight ends. So believe me when I say the volume to Muth this week could be a little bit down, and that could limit the upside. But with a lower ceiling this week, there is still a lot of touchdown to potential. I think with Chase Claypool being gone, this is going to be a great opportunity for Pat Freiermuth to really establish himself inside the 20. And when Kenny Pickett's looking for somebody, I think it's going to be this guy. Denver and Tennessee, and Greg Dulcich is actually going to be one of my favorite tight end plays of the week. They allow the 6th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. So Tennessee has a tough time stopping those tight ends. Dulcich is quickly becoming the guy in Denver, though. His receiving yards have increased each of the last 3 weeks. This is a good matchup. Finding the end zone again is going to be a real good possibility. Greg Dulcich is an absolute smash start for me this week in this matchup. The only thing that would concern me is Denver finally shows up this season. They put up a few points and then they run the football a little bit more than what we would anticipate. Now for the Tennessee Titans, Austin Hooper is still going to be listed here, but tight end Chigziam, and I probably messed that up, Okonkwo, and I probably messed that up as well. I tried to listen to 3 different videos to get the correct pronunciation of it. All 3 videos were different. I'm sorry. I'm going to call him the Chig, though, moving forward. He led the team in receiving yards last week. And given the state of the passing game, we would probably look at something like that and say, hey, is there opportunity here? But I'm not trusting anybody, especially if Malik Willis is going to continue to start. Malik Willis has raw talent. We're going to go into this at a different point. This is not the video for it. He has raw talent, but trying to start him this year was never the option anyway. Indianapolis and Las Vegas, and the changing of the guard at Indianapolis. It's going to be interesting to see how Jeff Saturday and whoever's going to call plays is going to be moving the offensive philosophy. Is it going to be what we've seen already? Are we going to be changing it? Are we going to get the tight ends more involved? Which tight end might it be? You've got 3 of them. And Las Vegas does allow the 5th most fantasy points to tight ends. So this is a great matchup. But until I see what happens with it, I can't go with it. Now, if they can move the ball a little bit more, there might be an opportunity to score a touchdown here. But for Las Vegas, Darren Waller's still going to be a sit here just because we don't know what's going to happen with him this week. He's still banged up. Probably won't end up starting again. It seems like for 2 weeks now he's been close, but still hasn't been able to get back out there. So we'd love to have Darren Waller out there, but until I see him back healthy and good, can't go with him. And then for those of you that are thinking Foster Moreau is an option to replace him, no. Just look to somebody else in this video. Dallas and Green Bay is going to have 2 starts for me. Again, Green Bay allows the 4th fewest fantasy points to opposing tight ends, but Dalton Schultz has 12 targets over the last 2 games. And while this does appear to be a more difficult matchup. They did just lose Rashawn Gary, a guy that on the edge, whether he's down on the ground, where he's standing up, they can do a lot of different things with Gary. He's going to be a guy that's going to now be missing out of the middle of the defense. How are they going to do that? How are they going to move some things around? So I feel like exploiting the middle of the defense this week is going to be the absolute play. Jair Alexander still having a fantastic season. He's going to maybe be on CeeDee Lamb this week, maybe Michael Gallup. So I could see Dalton Schultz getting anywhere from 6 to 10 targets this week. So we're going to list him as a high-risk start, but a guy whose floor could end up being pretty decent. For Big Bobby Tonyan, this is also not a great matchup, and this is very risky. But the reason I've got to list Tonyan as a start is because Allen Lazard is still banged up. Romeo Doubs is going to be missing this week. We've got 95-year-old Sammy Watkins, because it feels like he's been in the league forever, who just is not the guy that he used to be. He's running around out there. And then Christian Watson had concussion symptoms again last week and continues to be banged up all season. So I'm not starting Robert Tonyan because I think it's a good matchup or it's because he's going to have a good game. I'm starting him because I think there might not be anybody else that would be able to take the workload. And oh, by the way, Aaron Jones also banged up. Arizona and the LA Rams, and again, a whole lot of green on the slide. There's so much green this week. The LA Rams allow the 5th fewest fantasy points to tight ends, but Zach Ertz, he's the tight end 3. How do you sit the tight end 3? And even though we've been a little bit worried about his performance because, 2 weeks ago when DeAndre Hopkins came back, Ertz was kind of forgotten about, he has still scored each of the last 2 weeks. So he hasn't disappeared completely. And then for Tyler Higbee, yeah, we haven't been very, excited about what he's done recently, but Arizona allows the most fantasy points to second most points to opposing tight ends. And it's definitely the possibility of a bounce back week in such a great matchup because he is top 6 at the position in targets per game. Matthew Stafford is looking his way quite a bit, but unfortunately, it's only produced on a per game basis, top 24 numbers. So that's really brought things crashing down. But given the matchup, we've got to go back to him and just keep our fingers crossed. The Chargers in San Francisco, Gerald Everett, a bomb performance last week, and he did disappear, but we are going to go back to him this week, hoping he gets back on track. He's seen at least 7 targets per game over the last 3 games. The targets are there. The opportunity is there. The production has suffered recently, especially since the start of the season. We've seen some, up and down performances, but we're so banged up at wide receiver right now. It just feels like trying to sit Gerald Everett could end up being a huge, huge disappointment for us. Starting him could also be a huge, huge disappointment. But that's why we got to look at the risks this week and just decide who is less risky. And then for George Kittle, before the bye, he had back-to-back games with touchdowns. In 2 of his 3 games, he had over 80 receiving yards. So he's really starting to click again, and that's good to see. I am slightly worried about this game, though, because Derwin James is probably going to either see George Kittle or Deebo Samuel if he's able to get back out there. It could go either way. If he sees a majority of Kittle, Kittle's probably going to have a down performance. If he sees a majority of Deebo, if he plays, Kittle could end up having a good game. Deebo could have a tough game. So that's really going to be the key to this game is who is he going to be on and who is he going to be guarding a majority of the time. Monday Night Football, Washington and Philadelphia. Thomas has basically been invincible since coming back. Not invincible, invisible since coming back. We haven't seen anything from him. He was injured. He looked like a decent option to begin the year. Hasn't done anything since coming back. So for me, I'm going to look for better options this week. And for Dallas Goedert, Washington allows the fewest fantasy points to tight ends. Now, some of that has to do with tight ends that they faced throughout the season. So the numbers indicate a tougher matchup. But Goddard's coming off a huge game, and he is the number 2 in this offense right now behind A.J. Brown. Don't make no mistake about it. It's not Devontae Smith. It is Dallas Goedert as the number 2. We've got to run him out there again. The production has been there. The volume has been there. We cannot sit him in this matchup. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We're all done with the show. Tight ends for you this week. A lot of start options, but once again, a whole lot of risks associated with some of them. So make sure you come back on Thursday for the rankings for the tight end position, because then at that point, we'll try to risk out who's going to be the least riskiest, who has the most upside, and we'll figure out who to put in your lineup. Leave me comments down below if you've got questions. Hit that like button. And of course, if you're new here, you got to subscribe to the channel and become a part of Headliner Nation today. Appreciate everybody tuning into the video. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch y'all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.